My grandma and the creepy daycare. Some backstory first. This happened when my grandparents were in their early to mid 20s. My grandma had worked in daycares and schools for a while now, and while she quit, when she had kids, she would have kind of an unofficial daycare babysitting job at their house, taking care of some of the neighbors' kids whose parents worked during the day. Some new neighbors had just moved in down the street, a husband and wife. I think they had 2 kids. This being 60s suburbia, they invited my grandparents over for dinner one night. The wife was showing my grandma around the house a bit, and it turned out that they ran a daycare center from their house. She showed my grandma the room that they did it in, etc. My grandma had some trouble connecting with this woman, so of course she mentioned that she also ran a daycare at home. The woman immediately got angry with her, asking if she was accredited, if it was official and licensed, etc. Well, it wasn't, and she explained to the woman that it wasn't really a daycare, just her babysitting for some of the neighbor kids at her house. They were just calling it one. This seemed to calm the woman down, and they were able to have a normal dinner, although the husband and wife kept recommending that my grandma send the neighbors' kids, as well as my mom and uncle, over to their house, an accredited daycare center, during the day, instead of my grandma taking care of them. Well, the dinner went fine, and my grandparents laughed, a little creeped out, but whatever. A few years later, my grandma was reading the paper and saw that the husband had been arrested for molesting children, his own as well as the ones that were supposedly safe in their accredited home daycare. To this day, my grandma thinks that the reason the woman was so defensive is because she knew something was going on with her husband. Alex from daycare. Okay, I was gonna post this on an Ask Reddit post about stuff that was creepy and dangerous we did as kids, and I was too late to post my story, so here it goes. I was about 5 to 6 years old. My single mother tried so hard to raise us, and often left my younger sisters and I in daycare, while my older sister was in middle school. I don't remember how we met, but there was a 16 or so year old that stayed there. This daycare was public, and in an elementary school gym. The middle schoolers from around the area would stay in the gym and wait for the bus. Alex stayed there a lot, and he stayed until after I had already left. One day I was playing presidential spies with other girls, and Alex, he called me over. I remember the other girls looked very annoyed because instead of helping save the president, I went to talk to a yucky boy who was, in my eyes, an adult. He was lying on the floor in fetal position and had the computer near his face, watching something I can't remember what. He pulled me in and kinda spooned me and hugged me. I was so young, so excuse my stupidity. He kinda whispered in my ear, "Can I poke your butt?" I remember saying no, that I had to save the president, but he kept on squishing me closer to him. I was wearing pink tights and long matching pink shirt with a ballerina on it. Through the tights he poked my butt. I was really scared and I wanted to cry and I wanted him to stop. I had a very ugly feeling in my belly and a knot in my throat. Out of nowhere, I blurted out that I had to pee and he let me go. I ran to the girls I was playing with and told them to hide me because a monster was after me. Later on, my mom picked me and my sister up, and I went straight to her, no looking back. Also a moment of silence for my Barney stuffed dinosaur that was lost that day too. I never told my parents, but I remember never seeing him again. I think he thought I'd tell on him, so he was scared off maybe? But I haven't told a soul until today, where I decided to tell complete strangers from around the world. Alex, it's been over 10 years, and I pray to God we never meet again. Creepy guy at home daycare. I was in the middle of my final crunch, still am, when my mom called and started talking. Eventually, the conversation moved to my old babysitter, and when I hung up, I suddenly remembered this story. When I was little, we lived in a less than savory part of the city. Basically, my parents were poor when they immigrated, and in the year before I was born, they had managed to get decent job and connections, but it was still a while before they could afford to buy a nicer house. After all, I was just born, and they had to deal with paying for the kids first. We ended up moving away when I was 6 or 7. But because we had enough spare cash running around, my mom stopped foisting me off on my aunts and uncles like everyone else in the family did, and actually put me in daycare. The daycare I went to was basically run by this woman who had converted half of her house into a kid's play area. Mind you, the house was big too. Think a very old Victorian house with a huge yard. What would have been a second living room was a play area with one screen door that led to the garden and another clear glass door that led to a nap room. This lady ran it with 2 other women. It was actually a pretty nice setup. Most days it was full, pushing 11 kids, but one day I kept remembering why. There was only me and 2 or 3 other kids. I didn't take midday naps, but the other kids did, and so I was instructed by the ladies to stay quietly in the playroom while the other kids took a nap. So, only one daycare lady stayed in the room with me, and she was looking at the kids in the nap room. I ended up standing at the screen door, which was locked, that led to the garden and looking outside, and that's when I saw him, stumbling into view. He was a large, dirty man, wearing a t-shirt and sporting a large beard. This is winter in eastern Canada, it's fucking cold, and he's wearing a damn t-shirt? He looked directly at me, and then smiled. Me, being naive, screamed. Immediately, the daycare lady comes to tell me off, but she sees me and then calls all the other women in. Then he does the thing that stood out most. He reaches towards me and then makes a grabby gesture. The lady behind me grabbed me, dragged me to the nap room, while another called the police. He got away, but police found out the gate had been broken. I remember returning a few weeks later to find the lady who owned the house's husband installing a new lock on the gate. They also got an intercom for daycare customers. That being said, she lived in a very wealthy-looking house right next to my less than savory neighborhood, so it's no wonder. Still, fucked up. He liked the way I handled his son. This happened to me a few years ago. I need to give a few background details before I begin. My mother is from Ethiopia, and my father is a Mississippi native. I'm a few shades darker than most Caucasians, but sometimes people mistake me for white. At the time, I was living in the southernmost part of the reddest states in the USA, and just got a job as a toddler teacher at a daycare by my house. I loved the job. The children were so well behaved and had the cutest little faces you could imagine. I've always been a sucker for the terrible ones that no teacher likes to deal with. Those are the ones with the most interesting personalities. I worked in the 1s and 2s room. I also taught after school, so I had my own separate class for the afternoons. There was one little boy in particular named Daniel who was always making trouble. He would fight with the other babies unprovoked. He would pee on you on purpose while you changed him, and could start stripping at any random moment. Needless to say, Daniel was a handful. As I said before, I have a way with children that act out like this, and before long, Daniel was my little buddy. When a teacher couldn't handle him, he was sent to me, where he would do just fine. One day, when his father came to pick him up, he was with me in my class. I had seen his father pick him up plenty of times before, so I knew it was him, though we had never spoken before. He was hot. He reminded me of Wentworth Miller a little. I was actually kind of attracted to him, so it caught me off guard when he said something along the lines of, "Danny, what the hell you doing in this nigger bitch's class?" This completely caught me off guard because although I'm in the Deep South, where racism is everywhere, I had never experienced it at my job. All the parents were glad to see me, and I had a good rapport with all of them. I didn't respond to his rude comment, however. I just got Daniel ready, and I was hoping he didn't do our secret handshake, which involved a series of hand claps and ends up in us pressing our foreheads together and chanting, "I'm the best." Unfortunately, Daniel wouldn't leave until we did the entire handshake. I looked up, expecting his father to be highly upset, but he was just standing there staring at me with the widest eye-toothed grin that sent chills down my spine. Even Daniel looked up like, whoa, and looked back at me. I stood up to say bye and hopefully get him out of my class faster, but he stepped closer towards me and put his hand on my shoulder and said, "I like the way you handle my son." The way he said the word handle made the whole statement sound very perverted. I remained professional and said, "Thank you, he's a joy to have around." The very next day, Daniel didn't come to school. This wasn't out of the ordinary either, because sometimes he went to the daycare by his mother's house, which is further away. When I got to my desk, I noticed a red rose that's been spray painted black and had a piece of yarn around it like a noose. Another time, I found a small wooden cross on the hood of my car with a lighter next to it. Things like this happened for a few weeks. One day, as the day came to a close, all the other employees had left for the day and I had to close. We had a huge ball pit in the back of the center that covered 50% of the entire classroom. I was wiping down the blocks when I heard the very familiar sound of someone jumping in the ball pit. I got up to investigate, thinking that it was DJ McSqueak, our pet guinea pig, who was notorious for escaping and jumping in the ball pit. I looked in the cage and sure enough, DJ was not in his cage. I climbed in the pit and tried looking for him when I noticed a pair of legs in the ball pit. I noped the fuck out of the room and screamed as I heard the roar of plastic balls behind me, indicating that whoever it was now chasing me. I ran into the next classroom and locked the door. I could see the man's face pressed up against the window, and I recognized Daniel's dad. He was screaming at me to open the door. I started frantically looking for a phone, but I couldn't find one. The main phone was in the office, and the handset that belonged in his classroom was missing. I found the missing handset, but it was dead. I figured that this guy doesn't know that it's dead, so I pretended to call the police. It worked. He had the angriest look on his face and stormed out of the center, and after I heard the door click, I sprinted to my classroom, locked the door, and called the police for real. They showed up 10 minutes later, and I told them what happened. He was later arrested and charged, but he was out of jail after a month. Daniel, I think you're the sweetest little boy I've ever had the pleasure of working with. I hope one day you find this story and recognize I'm talking about you, and you remember the bond that we shared. As for your father, let's not meet.